to your first video lecture for Unit 2. This is a video on the context of Oh, What a Lovely War. So before we get started, just as a refresher, I'll remind you what context is. Context is everything that surrounds the creation and performance of a play. There are three types of context that are important for you to know about Oh, What a Lovely War, and we're going to have a look at those today. So the three types are the theatrical context, the playwright's context, as well as the play's context, and it's important that you have a solid understanding of each. So let's kick off by looking at the theatrical context. When we're looking at this, we're talking about where it fits in the theatre history timeline. So this particular play is epic theatre, as we know, but it's also musical theatre. So she's created a new blend of epic theatre and musical theatre together, but the main focus for today will be looking at epic theatre. Epic theatre occurred in early 19th century, and there was lots of different theatre styles that happened before it. So we had realism, which we've looked at in detail last unit, and we know the history of realism. After that came the polar opposite of that, which is expressionism, which is the sort of dreamlike state where theatre should be a representation of the subconscious. We then took a weird detour into surrealism and Dadaism, and then epic theatre came after that in about the 1930s. Epic theatre opposes realism in its attempt to suspend the audience's disbelief that they're watching a play. In fact, it does the absolute opposite. Epic theatre is called theatre of the social activist. It's very political, and the audience are always fully aware that they're watching a play so that they can then absorb the message that's being portrayed through them in the play. The point of this sort of system was to unify the audience and provoke them into strong, direct social action. Most of the plays that are in epic theatre are comments on historical periods in order to open people's eyes or change people's opinions about those particular events. Epic theatre did not want to pacify audiences like realism did. In fact, it was the opposite of that. It was trying to get them to do something. And the father of epic theatre, which of course is Brecht, believed that theatre is not a form of escape, and the audience shouldn't be subdued and just sort of entertained. He wanted to open their eyes and shock them into doing something. I love this quote from Brecht. Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer in which to shape it. So something that I need you to know, it's kind of like the suspending of disbelief with the realism, is the alienation effect. It's a key term for epic theatre. It means to make strange. So the audience must not empathise with the characters, they have to be objective. All choices made by the directors, designers and actors were to make sure the audience were aware they're fully watching a play. And in our styles video, we're going to go through that in a lot more detail. Let's have a little look at Brecht before we get any further, just so you can sort of see what was going on for him. He was in the Nazi Germany. He was around when the Nazis rose to power. He was a Marxist, which is the father of communism, Karl Marx, for those of you who know history. Marxism believed that the working class will and should someday revolt against the upper class oppressors and establish a new government of equality and sharing. Brecht was heavily influenced by expressionism as well. So we're not going to go into any more detail on the style. We'll do that next in the next series of videos. So we're going to go straight into the playwright's context now, and this is where we're looking at what was going on in the world when Littlewood wrote the play, or Littlewood's company. The musical was first performed in 1963 in London. Very, very English, as we can see all the way through the play. Littlewood had a company called the Theatre Workshop, and it was an ensemble-based theatre company. It was community and political theatre. And so every corner of the stage was alive and active, and everybody was involved in creating the work that they did. It wasn't just one person sort of dictating it, like we see in some other theatre styles. She got ideas from Stanislavski, Brecht and the Barn, and then she got her own ideas of acting, training and theatre, which we'll have a look at when we get to style. It is epic theatre, but she's created her own sort of subclass of epic theatre and incorporated the elements of musical theatre as well. The play was an epic theatre production aimed at presenting the political and social facts of World War I. She used Brechtian staging and techniques. We've had a little bit of a look at the men who were the clowns and the women who were the sort of showgirl characters. The play is structured so it follows the critical events of World War I. The text is epic in style, and it does not follow the conventional narrative or the sort of the conventions of a realistic play. The play starts off in 1914, which is the start of World War I, as we know, showing optimism, and then as the play progresses, the war progresses, and then we get that sort of dark, contrasting tone. As far as the play's historical context, it was written in the 60s, which is post-war. At this particular time, we had the end of World War II in 1945, and then we had the Cold War getting kicked off between America and Russia. We know in the Cold War that both of these countries were stockpiling nuclear weapons, and it was a lot of tension and suspicion. And at this particular time, people believed that World War I was just an absolute disaster, an accident, and a miscalculation. It's also important to note that the 60s was a time of change in music, art, and theatre. We had the whole swinging 1960s Austin Powers sort of style stuff. The Beatles were a huge deal, and they had only just come out when the play was written. And we also saw a post-war rise of a multicultural metropolis where all different races were sort of moving and mingling around the city. London was proclaimed the swinging city, and we had the sort of the hippie movement at that time. Let's look a little bit more at Littlewood herself and have a look at some of her values. She was a left-wing communist, like Brecht was. She constantly celebrated the resources of the working people. She loved their humour, their intelligence, their sharpness, and their ability to cope with the enormous problems that the upper class put upon them, such as, fighting a war that they don't really know much about. And above all, she liked their ability to survive and cope with, everything that they have to cope with, because obviously it's a lot harder for those guys than it is for the upper class. She had a deep love of humanity. She rejected the bourgeoisie, which is the upper class, and conservative conventions of traditional theatre. And so she wanted to create a theatre of the people, made by the people, for the people, and sort of reflect that Brechtian view. She preferred untrained actors who were not afraid of making fools of themselves. She would prefer, personality and spark over, hardcore training, and have, absolute substance about them rather than falling back on their expertise. It was a communist theatre and agitprop theatre. The company was egalitarian in its living and wages, so it was very much this idea of everyone's equal, everyone shares everything. The play specifically, when they created Oh, What a Lovely War, the cast were involved in building the script. They improvised based on different scenes, they read books, they discussed ideas, and again, it's this real communal feel, which is something that we definitely want to try and emulate as we move forward. The rehearsals were used as discoveries to shape the production, which I think is really exciting. Alright, let's briefly touch on the play's context. I don't want to go into this in too much detail because I feel like you guys should know enough about World War I to have a basic sort of understanding. So I've got a few key facts here. It started in 1914. It ended on the 11th of the 11th in 1918, which is obviously Remembrance Day. It produced death and destruction unlike any previous military conflict. It started in Europe and then it spread all over the world, the Middle East, Africa, Pacific Ocean, and South America. Massive consequences. So we had 65 million troops mobilized, and the total global deaths due to the war were more than 8.5 million. We have 58,961 Australian men who died, and over 9 million Australian men were wounded. We've heard the war be called the war to end all wars, the War of the Nations, and the Great War. So it was pretty devastating. I'm not going to go into what each of these mean because, again, I feel like you should have a good handle, just to refresh you, I guess, on the causes of World War I. Is that analogy of the stick of dynamite, where it was all compressed and tensions were high in Europe because of these four things. And so it was just sort of anything was going to spark it off. And obviously the thing that was going to spark it off was the assassination of the Archduke. And that happened in 1914. So we had the idea of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. I've got some discussion questions for you, so I want you to answer these three, ready to discuss. And also remember, guys, that the answer to these questions go into your director's folio. So question number 1. Why was Joan Littlewood's theatre company dubbed the People's Theatre? Question 2. Why did Littlewood use World War I specifically instead of World War II or the Cold War? And number 3, what would the upper class have thought about her performance when it first came out in 1963? So have a think about those, guys, write some answers down and we'll discuss them in class. Thank you very much, and I'll see you when I see you. Have a great day.